You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
My heart trusts in Him, and I receive help. My heart rejoices, and I give thanks to Him with my song. The Lord is the strength of His people. He is a refuge of deliverance for His anointed. Deliver your people and bless your inheritance. Shepherd them, and here's the key part, lift them up forever. What a deal. We don't have to carry our God around in the back of the cart. Our God's going to carry us and lift us up forever.
The best thing about God is that He is more powerful than anything else that exists. And He loves you. He's a God that will listen to you, that can change you and change others through you. Today, Pastor Ken is going to show you that even when dealing with frustrating people turning their backs on God, or even yourself falling into sin, you need to get your focus on God. Pray to Him, seek His will, and pray about whatever you need. Doing things God's way is always more joyful in the end. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah, chapter 46, as he begins his message, Idols and Stubborn Bull-Headed People.
Okay, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, bull-headed people. I'm one of them, okay? Actually, idols in stubborn bull-headed people. I got to make sure I get the whole Hebrew in there. And you know, the thing that's really amazing, and we'll find this out, yet the Lord still loves Israel, and you know, He loves us too, even though we qualify dramatically in that category. Lord willing, we're going to do all of chapter 46, so we'll see how that works. But we know coming up to this point that from Isaiah chapter 45, verses 9 and 10, the Jews of Isaiah's time did not really agree with God's plan to use Cyrus. They didn't like the idea that God was going to use a Gentile, pagan, non-Jew to deliver them. They didn't like that. They should be using a Jew. Well, you know, 700 years later, the Lord will use a Jew, and they don't like that either. They just can't get along. So we're reading about judgment here in chapter 46, and this is judgment on the government of Babylon. Now, and it reflects what's going to happen to them because of Cyrus. And then all of a sudden, when we get to the end of it, we're all of a sudden not in Babylon of 700 or 560 BC. We're suddenly in Babylon of sometime in the late 21st century at the end of Armageddon. And it's ultimately judgment of a nation, but it's also judgment of a way of life, a government, and people who have fully embraced the call of no gods. And unfortunately, that sounds an awful lot like what's going on in the world today. There are a lot of people embracing the call of the no gods, and they're not worshiping anybody except themselves. So the message of the next two chapters here, beginning in chapter 46, begins with the Lord telling us exactly what He thinks of the no gods. Now, those who bow to Yahweh and confess Him are not going to follow large, hard-to-move idols. So there's always this discussion of a remnant. And unlike Yahweh, you can talk to Him, even the Jews could, anywhere, from any time, God is the one who desires a relationship. He initiates the relationship with His people. But these no gods that we're going to talk about have to be put into carts so they can go out and meet those who worship them. Doesn't that sound exciting? Yeah, no. God doesn't have to do that, but these no gods do. So we're going to be talking about the gods of Babylon, specifically the ones that will be in charge of the religious side of Babylon when Cyrus moves in. Now, at the point that this is all being written, it's a city-state that's in rebellion to the Assyrian Empire, and they're kind of in trouble at this point. And they're not a world power, but they're going to be. They become in the Bible, and if you've studied the scriptures at all, you see Babylon popping up all the time. It's a picture of the city of man, and Jerusalem is the picture of the city of God, and they're always doing this. They're always hitting each other. And ultimately, we'll see that the city of man is destroyed in Revelation chapter 17 and 18. Now, spoilers before we get into this. We're going to discover that the fallen entities and demons who are behind all the deception involving idolatry 2,700 years ago are still active today. And they've moved on to more interesting lies. And we'll talk about those. They're active today, and in fact, they've increased their activity in direct alignment with the increase in the birth pangs predicted by Jesus in Matthew 24 as being in the last days. So let's back up to the time period that Isaiah is talking about. It's New Year's in Babylon. It's a festival. It's time for the gods to come out and meet their followers. So we pick up in verse 1. Bel has bowed down, and Nebo stoops over. Their images are consigned to the beasts and the cattle. The things that you carry are burdensome. It's a load for the weary beast. They stooped over, they've bowed down together. They couldn't rescue the burden, but they themselves have gone into captivity. Okay, this is satire. The Lord uses satire over and over and over again. We've already covered it when he started talking about, make a god out of a tree that you also barbecued with. And he makes a joke out of it. Here he produces this image of heavy idols being carted away by cattle as the gods either are being taken to escape from Cyrus or are being presented in this festival that takes place in Babylon every year at the New Year's. Escaping, by the way, was common in that time period, where if you knew that the enemy was attacking, you would take the gods that protect the city and you would leave the city with them to protect those gods. So you'd escape with your god. That's weird, but they did that. Anytime an invading army showed up, the first to head for the hills was the gods of the city. That way they wouldn't be captured. If they weren't removed and the city fell to the invaders, then the invaders would take the gods captive and cart them home to be held as a captive in the temple of their god. We actually see that in the Old Testament where the Ark of the Covenant is captured by the Philistines. They take it back to the inside of their temple, and it's not a good day for their God. I mean, at all. They find out that God really is who he says he is. But this is how, this way that it would show that the gods of the invader were more powerful than the gods of those who had just been captured. So there was this supernatural battle that most people at that time period thought was going on. That's normal. This is the way things were done. The Assyrian Empire did this. The Babylonian Empire did this. The only difference is that when Israel attacked someone, they didn't take the gods home with them. They burned them and destroyed them. At least they were supposed to. They didn't always do that. But we see the evidence of this in the book of Jeremiah. He discusses an invasion that's coming to Moab. And in Jeremiah 48:7, he says, Moab, you trust in the things you do and your riches. And you're going to be conquered. Your god Chemosh will go into exile along with his priests and his officials. And the Babylonians did attack Moab, and they did take their god back to Babylon. And he went into exile. And because they joined Judah in rebellion against Babylon. It doesn't end well for Moab. It just doesn't. But the powerlessness of the gods of the nations is a theme we see in the Old Testament over and over again. And Chemosh, who's the god of Moab, actually it's called Ashtar Chemosh, so you can start seeing how some of these names start joining together, because Ashtar is also the morning star or Venus, and they worship that too. There's another example that comes from the northern kingdom, and they had a problem worshiping bulls, and Hosea talks about that in chapter 10 of Hosea. He said, and this is before the Assyrians take them captive, the inhabitants of Samaria will lament over the calf idol of Beth Aven. Its people will mourn over it. Its idolatrous priests will wail over it because its splendor will be taken from them into exile. The calf idol will be carried to Assyria as tribute for the great king. And Ephraim will be disgraced and Israel will be put to shame because of its wooden idol. Again, they take the god prisoner and go back home with it. Any Jew who's reading this during the time of Isaiah knows this is what happens. They get it. But again, the only difference is the people of Yahweh, the Jews, when they took a city, they were supposed to destroy the entire pagan system of that city. They were given instructions to do that in the book of Numbers. They didn't always follow it, but they were supposed to do that. They did fail. Now, Cyrus was a little different. He was after the loyalty of those people that he conquered. And he knew that a step to achieve that loyalty would be allow those who had been conquered by Babylon to return home and take their gods with them. We actually have a press release from Cyrus. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder. We've already referred to it once before. But in it, we read this: all the kings of the entire world, from the upper to the lower sea, those who are seated in throne rooms and live in other types of buildings as well, all the kings of the west land living in tents brought their heavy tributes and kissed my feet in Babylon. He's king, they kiss his feet. That's how they show that they're going to be loyal to him. As to the region from as far as Ashur and Susa and Agad and Ishnuna and the towns of Zamban and Meterno. So he's talking about everything that's in Iran today, as well as the region of the Gutians. I returned to these sacred cities on the other side of the Tigris, the sanctuaries of which had been in ruins for a long time, the images which used to live therein, and established for them permanent sanctuaries. I also gathered all their former inhabitants and returned them to their inhabitations. And furthermore, I resettled upon the command of Marduk, the great lord, all the gods of Sumar and Akkad, whom Nabonidus had brought into Babylon, to the anger of the Lord of the gods. Nabonidus, who was the king he was the king. His son, Belshazzar, was kind of the regent. He's the one that had the little handwriting problem on the wall. Nabonidus actually worshiped the moon god, but he brought all the gods into Babylon because he knew that Persians were going to attack, so he wanted to make sure that he had at least the right god there someplace. So he brought them all in. So the first thing Cyrus does is he sends them home, and as it says, to make them happy. So he says, may all the gods that I've resettled in their sacred cities ask daily for Bel and Nebo, so there's the names of the Babylonian gods, for long life for me. And literally, this is not written by Cyrus, it's written by his press agent, because we also read that later in the book of Ezra that Cyrus also sends all the Jews home and he asks them to rebuild the temple. And he does that. Now, is there a history of this? In 703 BC, when Sennacherib attacks Babylon, and this is a contemporary of Isaiah, Merodach Baladan, he's the same guy that sent in agents to talk to King Hezekiah, evacuated all of his gods when the Assyrians captured them. That way they wouldn't be captured. So, I mean, he could be talking about that. We don't know. But there is a history of Marduk being captured. And it's amazing that they actually keep track of this. He was captured in 1244 and removed from Babylon. And then Nebuchadnezzar I, not the second, who was the one that Daniel dealt with, he brought it back from Elam. And then Sennacherib brought the statue to Assyria, and when the Babylonians went back and conquered Assyria, they brought him back. So we have this back and forth and back. And in fact, there's a verse account of Nabonidus that I put in your notes that talks about how he rescued the god. It says, the image of Babylonia, male and female, he returned to their cellars or cells, and who had abandoned their chapels, he returned to their mansions. I mean, he's bragging about this. And we read this today and we go, this is really strange. Am I the only one that thinks this is really strange? It is. But considering this history, we understand why the satire. We understand why God is saying what he's saying. Now, who's Bel? That's actually Marduk. And who's Nebo? Who are these two gods? Well, Bel had several names. In Tyre, he was called Baal. He was called Zeus by the Greeks and Jupiter by the Romans. And then Nebo, to the Egyptians, he was called Anubis. To the Greeks, Hermes, and to the Romans, he was known as Mercury. They just changed the names to confuse everybody. But the same entity is behind all of this. And that never changes. But what we see is that it's ironic, okay? These are gods who are supposed to protect the people, right? And they get taken captive. Not only do they get taken captive, but the animals that haul them, because they're covered with gold or silver or whatever, wears out the animals. They can't protect themselves. They can't rescue themselves. And the animals that are supposed to haul them away can't go the whole distance without being changed out. The supposed heads of the Babylonian pantheon are placed in carts and then sent away, possibly from Cyrus. And he did bring them all back. But these two verses that we see right here at the beginning of chapter 46 are reflective of the manner in which they were paraded around Babylon every year at the new year. Cyrus, who captured Babylon in 539, reinstated Marduk as the head of the Babylonian pantheon because the previous king, Nabonidus, had not. He had kicked him out. They wanted to make sure that he had the right God in there. I mean, Nebo, his name shows up in Nebuchadnezzar's name, Nabopolassar, Nabonidus, but, and actually his cultic center was just outside of Babylon. And when they celebrated the Babylonian New Year, they would take Marduk and Nebo and put them in carts and parade them around for everybody to see. So it sounds like almost like Isaiah is watching and he's seeing them fall over as the cart starts and stops. And somebody's got to go and pick this God back up so he stands up straight. So, I mean, it's, the cattle stop, he goes over. I love the idea. I mean, the Lord's got a sense of humor. He really does. Now, Nabonidus had actually dethroned Marduk and Nebo, and he became a devout follower of the moon god who went by the name of Sin. It looks like sin, but it's not pronounced that way. And we look today, and if you go back into the history of who it is that they worship in Islam, what's one of the pictures that you see? A half moon, right? That goes back to Sin. It's hard to see whether or not there's a connection, but there appears to be some kind of connection because worship of the moon god was a big deal in the Middle East. But this is one of the reasons why the Babylonians cooperated with Cyrus, is because they were mad at Nabonidus and Belshazzar for dissing their god Marduk. Why would it matter? Well, it mattered to them. This is how serious they took it. And, well, they stooped and crouched together and they crumbled to pieces. And they fell. Eventually they fell and they just disappeared. And they changed names, as we saw. And they started being called by something else. But here's the thing. If these great gods, the ones that have to be hauled away so they don't go into captivity, can't protect themselves from being destroyed. These are the great gods, the ones in charge of the whole pantheon. Well, neither can the minor ones either. And they had all these minor guys as well. So they all wind up going into captivity. Now, the Lord calls it something different. In Psalm 82, he talks to them as former members of the divine council, and he says they're all going to die like men. And in Revelation chapter 20, they all wind up going to the pit. So God, after making fun of these gods, turns to his people with a command. And his first word is, listen. Now, this is serious, and this is a serious contrast. He's talking about gods who fall over in carts, can't listen, can't talk, can't even hold themselves up straight. Earlier, he said you got to nail it to the wall to keep it from falling over. Well, now God is talking to his people. This is the real God. Verse 3, listen to me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel. You who have been born by me from birth and have been carried from the womb, even to your old age, I will be the same. Even to your graying years, I will bear you. I've done it, and I will carry you, and I will bear you, and I will deliver you. And there it is. You know, here you've got these gods being hauled around in a cart, and God turns around and says, no, I'm carrying you. You don't have to carry me. I'm carrying all of you, all of Israel. He's been talking about gods who've got to be carried around. And he points out, as it pertains to Israel, it's the other way around. He's the one that carries them. He's the one that supports them. He's the one that supports us. It's not the other way around. Now, again, remember, Hezekiah is king, Judah's still a nation, but there are two terms that he uses here, house of Jacob and remnant of the house of Israel, that's pointing to a remnant that isn't there yet, but it's pointing to something that's going to happen. So what remnant are we talking about? Is this the remnant that's going to witness the festivals in Babylon and physically see Bel and Nebo fall over all the time on New Year's? Yeah, I think that's the one he's talking to. But there's another remnant also that's a little further in the future, still in our future as well, that he's ultimately going to be talking to by the time we get to the end of the chapter. Now, he's talking, first of all, to those who are going to be rescued by Cyrus. Yeah, there's disagreement in Judah about the fact that you're going to have a Gentile king deliver you. But God's still going to carry through with his plan. Thank you for your feedback, is what the Lord's saying. I'm going to do what I think I need to do because I'm the creator of the universe and you aren't. He's the one who's carried them. And here's the good news. He points out when he does this that, you know, his grace never changes. It's always the same. There will never be a time when God's people will outgrow their need to be carried by him or rely on him completely. I have found that I rely more and more on the Lord every day rather than the opposite. And I think anybody who's walked with the Lord for any part of any length of time find out that the more they walk with the Lord, the more they rely on the Lord. Because He's the one He promises never to leave us or forsake us. He promises to be closer than a brother. He promises to be inside of us with the Holy Spirit. And we start learning to take Him at His word and let Him do that. I love what the psalmist says in Psalm 28, starting in verse 6. Blessed be the Lord, for He's heard the sound of my supplications. The Lord is my strength and my shield, and my heart trusts in Him. And I received help. My heart rejoices, and I give thanks to Him with my song. The Lord is the strength of His people. He is a refuge of deliverance for His anointed. Deliver your people and bless your inheritance. Shepherd them, and here's the key part, lift them up forever. What a deal. We don't have to carry our God around in the back of a cart. Our God's going to carry us and lift us up forever. Not just for a festival, but forever. So God repeats His promise. I have made you and I will carry you. This way they know it for sure. I mean, 2 times He says that. I've made you, I'll carry you. And at this point, there should be no doubt that God has determined, this is the 3rd time He's saying this, that He will sustain them and He will rescue them. The audience at this point should understand that and know that. But do you pick up on the fact that I do, that the nation of Israel is a little stubborn? You know, and then I have to take a step back and I'm going like, Lord, am I that stubborn? And if I ask that question to the Lord, I immediately hear, yeah, you are. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Ken, you are that stubborn. The contrast is clear. God's the creator. He's the one that cares for His people, and anything or anyone else is false and subject to failure. It's that simple. They'll fall over as the cart starts and stops. So God speaks to the nation as though it's an individual that's growing old and the hair is turning gray. Mine's actually platinum blonde now, where it hasn't fallen out. But He promises to support them forever. And the Hebrew word that's rendered gray hairs can also mean old age. There's a word play here, actually, between what is used for captivity in verse 2, it's shebi, and Yahweh's hinting that He'll support their people even while they're in exile. So that it's kind of this wordplay thing going on. He says, yeah, you got gray hair, but I'm also going to take care of you when you're in exile too. So verse 5, the Lord speaking, to whom would you liken me and make me equal and compare me that we would be alike? And He says, to those who lavish gold from the purse and weigh silver on the scale and hire a goldsmith, He makes it into a god. They bow down, indeed they worship it. They lift it upon the shoulder and carry it. They set it in its place and it stands there. It can't move from its place, though one may cry to it. It cannot answer and it cannot deliver him from his distress. God's making fun of the no-gods. And our problem is we're looking at this in a 21st century lens, and we don't see it the way that the Jews see it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. He's making fun of the entities that are actually behind these statues. They're created fallen gods or fallen divine beings. They're fallen angels, if you want to call it that. And they're actually acting like they want to be gods. They're not gods. They're just fallen angels. And they insist on being worshiped and being represented by wood or gold statues.
It's true that some of us are introverts and some of us are extroverts. But did you know Jesus designed us to function best when we're part of a community? We all have God-given gifts and abilities that, when used rightly and in conjunction with others, the effect for the kingdom of God will be profound. It will reach many who are lost and hurting. So, listeners, if you don't have a community that you belong to, won't you consider getting connected with ours? Or at least learning what we believe and why? The UnsafeBible.com has all that information, and we'd encourage you to read what's written there and then spend some time in prayer. The Unsafe Bible is a radio ministry based out of Jupiter, Florida, and we're so glad that you've paused long enough to listen to today's message from Pastor Ken. If you like what you heard today, and we've piqued your curiosity, why don't you satisfy it by checking out all the other messages we have for you? Go to the unsafebible.com and click on the Media tab. That's the direct link to our archive. We trust that what you find there will challenge and grow your faith. While you're there, be sure to check out the other ways to stay connected with what's happening here at Calvary Chapel, Martin County. Would you rather enjoy connecting through social media? You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Pick your favorite platform, or utilize all three. We trust that today's message from Isaiah spoke to your heart and challenged the parts of you that aren't looking like Jesus. Thanks for listening to the UnSafe Bible.